The Indiana Fever just exposed the biggest scandal in WNBA playoff history, and nobody wants to talk about it. What happened in Game 5 of their 2024 playoff series against Las Vegas wasn't just controversial. It was so blatantly rigged that even neutral fans are calling for a full investigation. Think about this for a second. Aaliyah Boston fouls out on phantom calls while getting mauled underneath. Kelsey Mitchell gets hacked so badly she ends up hospitalized with cramps from the physical abuse. Odyssey Sims gets clipped driving to the basket, and somehow she's the one who gets called for the foul. And through all of this chaos, the whistle only seemed to work one way, toward Vegas. If you think I'm exaggerating, wait until you hear what actually went down in those final minutes and what the players are saying about it now in 2025. But before we dive into the shocking details, make sure you hit that like button if you think the refs need to be held accountable for what they did to Indiana. And drop a comment below telling us which call made you the angriest, because trust me, there were plenty to choose from. The pattern started way before Game 5 though. From the very first game of the series, something felt off about how this matchup was being officiated. Every single time Indiana built momentum, every time they went on a run, suddenly the whistles would start blowing. And coincidentally, they always seemed to blow in Vegas's favor. Aaliyah Boston was getting called for moving screens that weren't even close to illegal, while A'ja Wilson was literally shoving defenders out of her way with no consequences. The free throw disparity was so ridiculous that by Game 3, Vegas had shot nearly double the free throws that Indiana had. How does that even happen in a playoff series where both teams are supposed to be playing physical basketball? What made it worse was the inconsistency. One possession, a slight bump would be called a foul on Indiana. The very next possession, a Vegas player could practically tackle someone, and the refs would swallow their whistles. Stephanie White, the Fever's coach, tried to stay professional about it, but you could see the frustration building. How do you coach a team when the rules keep changing depending on who has the ball? How do you draw up defensive schemes when your best defender might get called for breathing on someone wrong? But that wasn't the whole story, because what happened in Game 5 took everything to a whole new level of corruption. This wasn't just bad officiating anymore. This was something that looked orchestrated, planned, designed to ensure a specific outcome. The evidence was right there for everyone to see. Aaliyah Boston picked up her 4th foul on one of the softest moving screen calls in playoff history. Watch the replay and she barely even makes contact with the defender. Then, minutes later, Megan Gustafson literally flops to the ground like she got hit by a truck when Boston barely touched her. Of course, the refs called another offensive foul on Boston. The knockout punch came with 26 seconds left in regulation. Boston and Jackie Young are fighting for a rebound, something that happens 50 times every game. Suddenly, the whistle blows and Boston is called for her 6th foul. She's out of the game. The Fever challenge it because anyone with eyes could see it was a terrible call. The refs review it and somehow still uphold it. Jackie Young goes to the line, makes both free throws, and Vegas takes the lead. Indiana has to finish the game without their all-star center tier, without their defensive anchor, without the player who had been keeping them in the game all night. What happened next would shock everyone watching, because despite losing their best post player, despite the refs clearly trying to hand Vegas the win, Indiana refused to quit. Odyssey Sims turned into a one-woman wrecking crew, scoring at will and keeping the Fever alive. She finished with 27 points and was getting absolutely destroyed every time she drove to the basket. But somehow the refs couldn't find their whistles for those plays. Kelsey Mitchell was putting up 15 points before her body literally gave out from the beating she was taking. She had to be helped off the court with severe cramps that were so bad she ended up in the hospital after the game. Think about that for a second. She was getting hit so hard, so often, with no calls, that her body physically shut down from the trauma. The physical abuse wasn't limited to just those two either. Lexi Hull got shoved so hard by Jewell Loyd that fans were calling for a flagrant foul review. The refs looked at it and called it a common foul. Natasha Howard got raked across the face, and there wasn't even a review. The Fever ended up with 25 fouls called against them, while Vegas practically lived at the free throw line all night. A'ja Wilson alone shot 10 free throws, while Boston, who was battling in the paint all game, shot just 2. How does that math even work? How does the player spending the entire game in the paint, getting hacked and grabbed constantly, only shoot 2 free throws? But here's where the story gets even crazier, because despite all of this, despite playing 5 against 8, despite losing players to injury and foul trouble, Indiana still forced overtime. They literally refused to let the refs steal this game from them in regulation. Odyssey Sims hit a clutch layup late to tie the game and send it to overtime. The crowd was going insane because everyone could see what was happening. This wasn't just a basketball game anymore. This was David versus Goliath if Goliath also had the referees in his pocket. The overtime period was more of the same, though. Every 50-50 call went Vegas's way. Every bit of contact on Indiana's drives was ignored while Vegas got to the line on touch fouls. It was so blatant that even the announcers were struggling to explain some of the calls. You could hear the confusion in their voices as they tried to justify what everyone could see was unjustifiable. The Fever fought until the very end, but you can only overcome so much. When you're playing against a great team and the officials, winning becomes nearly impossible. Now here's what makes this whole situation even more suspicious. After the game, several players and coaches made comments that suggested they knew exactly what had happened but couldn't say it directly. Lexi Hull talked about how they were built for adversity, how they'd been through this before. Read between the lines there. She's saying they're used to getting screwed over by the refs. Stephanie White mentioned how proud she was of her team for fighting through everything thrown at them. Everything, not just the aces. Everything thrown at them. These weren't random comments. These were carefully worded statements from people who knew they couldn't directly call out the officiating without getting fined, but wanted everyone to know they saw what happened. The reaction from fans and media was immediate and explosive. Social media lit up with clips of the worst calls, frame-by-frame breakdowns showing how badly the Fever got robbed. Even neutral fans who had no stake in the series were calling it one of the most poorly officiated games they'd ever seen. Former players were tweeting about it. Analysts were discussing it on podcasts. Everyone could see what had happened except apparently the league office, which remained suspiciously silent about the whole thing. What really revealed the truth, though, was looking at the broader context of the series. This wasn't just one bad game. This was a pattern that had been building since Game 1. The free throw disparities, the phantom calls on Indiana's best players, the no calls on obvious fouls against them, it all added up to something that looked less like incompetence and more like intent. And when you consider that Vegas was the defending champion, that they were expected to win, that the league probably wanted them in the next round for ratings purposes, suddenly the picture becomes a lot clearer. Fast forward to 2025, and we're seeing the long-term impact of what happened that night. The Indiana Fever have become one of the most exciting young teams in the league, with Caitlin Clark now leading the charge as their superstar point guard. Aaliyah Boston has developed into one of the best senders in the game. The team that got robbed in that playoff series has turned into a powerhouse that nobody wants to face. And you know what? Maybe that adversity, that injustice they faced, made them stronger. Maybe having to fight through that corruption taught them how to battle through anything. But that doesn't make what happened right. The integrity of the game was compromised that night. Fans witnessed something that shouldn't happen in professional sports. A team got robbed of a fair chance to compete because someone, somewhere, decided the outcome before the game even started. The referees weren't calling a basketball game. They were following a script, and the worst part is that nothing was done about it. No investigation, no accountability, no acknowledgement that anything was wrong. The players deserve better than that. The fans deserve better than that. The game itself deserves better than that. When you watch a playoff game, you should be watching the best teams compete at the highest level, not watching referees manipulate the outcome. What happened to Indiana in Game 5 wasn't just bad for the Fever, it was bad for the entire league. It damaged the credibility of the sport and made fans question whether what they're watching is even real competition anymore. Think about what this means for the future of the WNBA. If teams know that playoff games can be influenced by officiating, if players know that their best efforts might not matter because the refs have already decided who should win, what does that do to the competitive integrity of the league? How can you ask players to give everything they have when they know the deck might be stacked against them? How can you ask fans to invest emotionally and financially in a product that might be predetermined? The 2025 season has shown us that the Indiana Fever are legitimate contenders now. They've got the talent, the coaching, and most importantly, the mental toughness to compete with anyone. But they shouldn't have had to wait this long. They shouldn't have been denied a fair chance in 2024 because someone decided Vegas needed to advance. They earned the right to compete on a level playing field, and that right was taken away from them by officials who forgot their job was to call the game fairly, not to influence the outcome. What's even more frustrating is that this story has been largely buried. The league wants everyone to forget about it, to move on, to pretend it never happened. But the players remember, the fans remember. And every time Indiana takes the court now, there's a part of them that's still fighting against the injustice of that night. They're not just trying to win basketball games. They're trying to prove that talent and heart can overcome corruption, that the best team should win regardless of what the powers that be might want. The question now is whether anything will change. Will the league take steps to ensure this never happens again? Will there be more accountability for officials who clearly favor one team over another? Will there be transparency in how games are officiated and reviewed? Or will we continue to see situations where the outcome feels predetermined, where certain teams get certain calls, where the integrity of the game takes a back seat to other interests? As we watch the 2025 season unfold, as we see Indiana continuing to grow and improve, we can't forget what they went through to get here. They didn't just lose a playoff game. They had it stolen from them in broad daylight with everyone watching. And the fact that they've bounced back from that they've become even stronger, that they've refused to let that injustice define them, tells you everything you need to know about the character of this team. But make no mistake, what happened in Game 5 was wrong. It was a black mark on the league, a moment where the sport failed its players and fans. And until there's real accountability, until there's acknowledgement of what happened, until steps are taken to prevent it from happening again, that stain will remain. The Indiana Fever deserved better. The fans deserved better. The game deserved better. And pretending it didn't happen doesn't make it go away. It just ensures it will happen again. If you made it this far, you're probably as fired up about this as we are. Drop a comment below and let us know if you think the league should investigate what happened in that series. And don't forget to subscribe because we're gonna keep exposing the truth about what really goes on in the WNBA, even when nobody else will talk about it. The players deserve a voice, the fans deserve the truth, and we're gonna keep fighting for both.